Continuing my read through the Jerusalem Bible, I have now finished the book of Psalms. Now, if you're new here, or if you've completely forgotten that I'm doing a read through of the Bible, then you are certainly to be forgiven for this, because it has been a year since I last talked about a book of the Bible, and apologies for that. I just got bogged down in the book of Psalms. It's a long book to get through. I got distracted by a number of other things this year, both reading projects and other things. And sometimes I just don't find the book of Psalms to be compelling reading. So it lost my attention at points this past year. But I did finish the whole thing, so I'm here to talk about it now. So obvious caveat that I need to make is because it took me a year to finish this, the beginning Psalms are not going to be fresh in my memory. The commentary is not going to be very sharp. This will be talking about generalities, etc. Although I have bookmarked a few things that I made note of along the way that struck me. There are points of interest in here that I have made note of and will hopefully get around to talking about. But let's talk about overview of Psalms. So way back when I started this project of rereading the Bible, I made a long video in which I gave my history with the Bible and my experience reading it the first time, which was in 7th grade when I was on a project to read through the entire Bible, one chapter a night, and talked about how reading through parts of the Old Testament, particularly Psalms, I found very boring when I was in 7th grade. I like narrative. The Psalms are not narrative, they're more poetry. And I found them very boring and very repetitive, and I really had to struggle to keep my eyes from glazing over. Now, I was trying at the time to do a serious read-through of the Bible. So whenever I caught my eyes glazing over, like whenever I got to the bottom of a psalm and I realized that I hadn't been concentrating on it and that my mind had been thinking of other things, I made myself go back to the top and read it again. I had some of that experience again this past year, going through the Psalms again. So that can be the experience of the Psalms. It's interesting, though. Some people seem to really love this book. If that's you and you're watching this video, boy, you're probably going to hate this video, huh? Apologies. I'm doing my best here to engage with it. It's just... It's not my speed, but it was notable. I talked about in the first video I made for this series that one of the reasons I was inspired to go back through the Bible again, even though I'm no longer a believing Christian, is Steve Donahue's video about reading the Western Canon Starter Kit, and how the Bible was, text number 1 of the Western Canon. And Steve did not advocate reading the whole Bible necessarily. He gave some books that he viewed as essential, mostly narrative books. But what's interesting is a number of people apparently pushed back on this and said, no, you need to include the Psalms. Because in the next video he made, Steve had a correction and said, a number of you have also said we should add the Psalms. And he said, yeah, and you can add the Psalms if you want. So, even though I find the Psalms very hard going, I guess other people quite like it. It's probably has to do a lot with temperament, right? People who like poetry, people who like poetic language will like the Psalms. People like me who want to hear the stories and the narrative and the history, but are not really so into poetry, will maybe not like the Psalms. But I did really make an effort this time around to try and view the positives, to try and find what is of interest in the Psalms. And I think I did find a lot of things that are of interest. And I'll talk about all of those. Although I also did find that in between the things of interest which jumped out at me, there was just a whole lot of boring stuff. So, maybe I'll start with talking about some of the things I found boring. The Psalms are, I guess, supposed to be hymns to God, the same way we sing hymnals in church. The Psalms are like, these were the ancient hymns that were sung to God. Now, since I have become more skeptical, I have started to view the singing of praise songs in church with more of a questioning eye, or ear maybe. And I think this is quite common. I've since I've been back in America, I've talked to some of my old friends who came from the same religious community I did growing up, and some of whom are skeptical nowadays, and they talk about how they also find it weird to sing hymns. There's, if you take any kind of questioning eye or ear, or questioning mind, I guess, to the singing of hymns, there's always a question about why are we doing this, and what really does God get out of it? And there are, to be fair, a couple of different types of hymns, and there's a couple of different types of psalms. There are hymns which are not addressed to God, but they're meant to be addressed to the singers themselves, or the congregation. So, this is a message that we are singing to ourselves, that we are singing aloud, but we're supposed to focus on this. And maybe Amazing Grace would be just an example that springs to mind. You're not really worshiping God by singing that song. Maybe you are. But you are also just reinforcing a message to the people singing it themselves about how amazing grace is and about how wonderful the grace is. And there are psalms like that as well, I think, that are not directed so much to God, but directed to the people listening to the psalm, or I guess the community singing it. But there are also praise songs, just like praise hymns. And you wonder what God really gets out of these. And since I've been back in the U.S., I've started reattending church, although with a skeptical eye some of the time. And the songs are, a lot of them are just like, oh God, you are so wonderful. You can do anything. You can move mountains. You can part those seas. You can move the waters. And you think to yourself, well, yeah, of course. I mean, he's the creator of the universe. He's this omnipotent being who is in control of everything. I mean, assuming you buy into the Christian worldview, of course. So if what does he get out of these small little humans singing to him about how he can move mountains? God must be listening to these songs, right? And thinking like, oh, come on, you have no idea what I can do. And there are elements to that in these psalms. There are a lot of examples, but the strength of the war horse means nothing to him. It is not infantry that interests him. Sing to Yahweh in gratitude, who covers the earth with clouds, to provide the earth and rain, to produce fresh grass on the hillsides, and the plants that are needed by man. Imagine a cosmic God who is in control of the whole universe is going to be gratified because you're saying that he's stronger than a war horse. I don't know. Now, to be fair, one of the things that I've been realizing as I've been getting more into ancient literature, and here I have my anthology of Akkadian literature here from the Akkadian Empire, Babylonian Empire, and Assyrian Empire, still working my way through this, is that this was not unique to the Bible. This was just kind of the style of ancient hymns in Mesopotamia generally. So you can't just blame all of this on the book of Psalms. You just have to accept that this was the way people communicated with their gods. But it still does strike a skeptic as being odd. The other thing is the repetitive nature of this praise. Now, I'm going to come back to modify this statement in just a bit. But if you're not reading with attention, it's easy to kind of think that this is just the same praise over and over and over again. And then there will sometimes be a little bit of a note here. So you get to Psalm 53, and there's a note here that Psalm 53 is just Psalm 14 by an Elohistic editor. There are two different names for God used in the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh and Elohim, I guess if you believe the source theory of the Bible, there were slightly different views of God associated with the different names and the different writing styles. But I guess the point being, this is Psalm 14 is just redone in a different way. And there are a few of these notes that pop up. And I think if you do some research into the book of Psalms, there's a lot of the Psalms that get repurposed with slight edits later on in the book. So it's not just, if you're reading through the book of Psalms and you're like, boy, feels like this is all the same, it may not just be your imagination. It may be that some of it actually is the same as the stuff that came before it. Okay, so now that I've gotten that out of my system, let me try and put on a different hat here and go through and talk about what might be of interest in the Psalms. So Psalm 1, the two ways, talks about how the people who follow God are going to be happy, and the people who don't follow God are going to be unhappy, right? So happy the man who never follows the advice of the wicked. He is like a tree that is planted by water streams, its leaves never fading. Success attends all he does. It is nothing like this with the wicked, nothing like this. Jumping down, for Yahweh takes care of the way the virtuous go, but the way of the wicked is doomed. So that's a neat little theology, right? Follow God, you're going to be happy and have success. If you're wicked, you're going to be doomed. But this is quite jarring if you're reading your way through the Bible, because you have just gotten done with the book of Job. So you just finished Job, and then all of a sudden, people who follow God are happy, people who are wicked suffer. And you're like, wait, no, that wasn't the message of Job. The message of Job is sometimes good people suffer just because, because God created Leviathan or something like that. So that's quite jarring to read that, but you read a little bit further, and all of a sudden, Psalm 3, you get the morning prayer of the virtuous man under persecution. So Yahweh, more and more are turning against me. More and more are rebelling against me. So he is being besieged by his enemies, and he's calling out to God for help. And I guess if we're optimistic, we can assume maybe God does come in and help him or something like that. But this is a far cry from just happy the man who never follows the advice of the wicked. And as we go through, prayer in ordeal, prayer of the virtuous under persecution, we do find a lot of people who are saying, God, where are you? Help me out here. I'm in trouble and you're not helping me, which is different than happy the man who never follows the advice of the wicked. But then, we get God crushes the wicked and saves the humble. So if you're like me and you have a hard time kind of reading through these Psalms without your eyes glazing over, one intellectual exercise you can do is take each Psalm by itself and say, okay, what is the theology in this Psalm? Do good people suffer misfortune, or do good people never suffer misfortune? It's different from Psalm to Psalm. Is God the protector who never lets anything bad happen to people? Like Psalm 23. Or is this person suffering and God is not showing up to help? Because that pops up in a lot of these Psalms as well. So there are both praise Psalms to God, but there are also complaints against God in these Psalms. How to reconcile all of these different worldviews is the work of a theologian. I'm sure they've got their work cut out for them, and I'm sure that discussion has been had. But just as a casual reader, it's interesting to take each of these Psalms as its own little capsule and say, okay, what's going on here? What's the theology? What does this writer expect from God, etc.? Because it's different for different Psalms. Aside from that, there are a bunch of interesting little historical details that pop up in these Psalms. Here is one, Psalm 44, National Lament, which I thought was quite interesting. So let me maybe set the background for this a little bit. The narrative of the Old Testament is that God let Israel and Judah be conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians because Israel and Judah did not worship God hard enough. They got the warnings from the prophets, worship Yahweh or be destroyed. They ignored these warnings, and then they got destroyed by Assyria and Babylon. Now, never mind that Assyria and Babylon were much bigger and stronger than Israel and Judah were anyways. And that even if there wasn't a God, that Israel and Judah probably didn't stand much of a chance against Assyria and Babylon. The message is we got conquered by Israel and Babylon because we didn't worship God hard enough. What's interesting, I think, if you study a lot of history, especially like ancient history, is that this is a worldview which pops up a lot. So whenever a city or a nation is destroyed by its enemies, there's quite often a religious revival or rebirth, saying, okay, why did the God let this happen? What did we do wrong? I mean, I was reading a history of Thailand once. I believe this was by David Smith, if I'm remembering the name right, who describes how one of the northern capitals of Thailand was destroyed by its enemies. And this led to a renewal or a rebirth of an intense form of Buddhism, because they believed that they hadn't been worshiping their God strong enough, and that's why their city got destroyed. So all of that is a long way of saying it's possible that this idea that we weren't following the religion correctly, and that's why God let us be destroyed, it's possible that that might be a revisionist view. And that if you actually had a time machine and you could go back to Israel, you could go back to Judah before their fall and talk to the people, they might say, oh, actually, I think we're worshiping God just fine. We're doing everything we're supposed to be doing. they and that seems to be, to me, what Psalm 44 is saying. So this is, the dating of this is not given in the Jerusalem Bible, but it appears to have been after the destruction or defeat by a foreign enemy. And it says, "Our boast was always of God. We praised your name without ceasing. Yet now you abandon and scorn us. You no longer march with our armies. You allow the enemy to push us back, and let those who hate us raid us when it suits them. You let us go to the slaughterhouse like sheep. Thanks to you, our neighbors insult us." Yeah. And then jumping to the next page. "All this happened to us, though we had not forgotten you, though we had not been disloyal to your covenant, though our hearts had not turned away, though our steps had not left your path. Yet you crushed us in the place where the jackals live, and threw the shadow of death over us." And then the end here. "Wake up, Lord. Why are you asleep? Awake, do not abandon us for good. Why do you hide your face and forget we are wretched and exploited?" So, the theology here is not the theology that you get from the narrative in 1st and 2nd Kings, and the prophets for that matter, right? We didn't worship God hard enough. That's why we got destroyed by Assyria and Babylon. The writer of this is like, no, we were worshiping. We were doing all the stuff. We got destroyed because God just abandoned us. So this, there are interesting perspectives here in the Psalms that you do not get in the main historical narrative, and it's interesting to counterbalance that out. And there are a lot of interesting things like that once you dig in here. And again, there's a lot of boring stuff as well, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of interesting stuff as well here. Let's see, talked about this one already. Okay, so Psalm 74 is interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a lament on the destruction of the temple. And if we follow the notes here, it says probably a description of the destruction of the temple by the mad king Antiochus Epiphanes. So he is the madman of verse 22. So there's a madman described in verse 22. Do not forget the madman's day-long blaspheming. That's Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, this surprised me when I read that footnote because, I guess there are a few different views on the Psalms depending on what you learned in Sunday school. What I learned in Sunday school is that the Psalms were all written by King David. Now, to be fair, I don't think that's what most sophisticated Christians believe, because it's very evident from reading the Psalms that some of them are from the Babylonian period. But even if you believe that some of them are from the Babylonian period, I had always been taught as a Protestant growing up that God's revelation in the Old Testament ended shortly after the Babylonian exile, and that there was this 400-year period where God was silent. But if Psalm 74 is from the period of Antiochus Epiphanes, that would be when? 200 BC? 100 BC? I forget exactly, but well after the period where I was taught that there were no revelations coming from God. So I did not know that the Psalms were as late as that. The other thing that's interesting in here This is something that I was first alerted to by Christine Hayes in her lectures on Psalms. And she makes a point in her lectures on Psalms that a lot of people think that Psalms are boring, but if you dig in there and you get into them, there's a lot of interesting mythology in the Psalms. So she makes a point that in a lot of ancient Mesopotamian mythology, at the beginning of the creation of the world, there's some sort of sea monster, sea serpent, which is slain. And that, of course, is very different than the account of Genesis 1 and 2, where there is no sea serpent that is slain at the creation of the world. But Christine Hayes said, don't think that the Hebrews didn't know these stories, because these stories do sneak in other places, like in Psalms. And here's a good example. Yet God, my King from the first, author of saving acts throughout the earth, by your power you split the sea in two and smashed the heads of monsters of the waters. You crushed Leviathan's head, leaving him for wild animals to eat. You opened the springs and torrents, etc. And there is, I believe, one more place in Psalms where God slaying Leviathan is in there. And I forgot to bookmark that other place before I started this video. But I believe that's one of two references to God slaying Leviathan. Another interesting message something interesting over here. For the restoration of Israel, it says, Shepherd of Israel, listen, you who lead Joseph like a flock, enthroned on the cherub shrine, on Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh. And then the footnote here says, the principal tribes of the north. So I guess Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh are the principal tribes of the north. But again, this is conflicting with what we get in the historical narrative from 1st and 2nd Kings, I guess primarily 1st Kings, where Benjamin is associated with the kingdom of Judah. Here in the Psalms, it's the principal tribes of the north. So this confused me, and I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole on this, trying to figure out what was going on. I also consulted the NIV Study Bible, which has also has a bunch of notes at the end, different notes in often cases. I think the NIV Study Bible mentioned that apparently looks like the kingdom of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin must have been split. I guess some of it went with Israel, some of it went with Judah. What happened to the tribe of Benjamin is something I've discussed in some of the previous videos. I had one teacher before who did tell me that the tribe of Benjamin was split between Israel and Judah. I never accepted that because I couldn't find it in the historical narrative, but I guess maybe this is where it's coming from, the Psalms. I'm almost out of time here, so I'm going to have to go through things quickly. Psalm 83 has a list of the enemies of Judah. Now the footnote is interesting because it says these are the 10 traditional enemies of Israel. 3 of them are not immediately familiar from the historical books. So again, if all you're doing is reading the historical narratives, then there are 3 enemies of Israel which are not included, not because anyone's censoring it, I think, but just because, they didn't get around to telling those stories for whatever reason. So there is a lot of historical detail which is in the Psalms. Now, skeptic that I am, I'm pointing out to you a lot of the places where the Psalms are contradicting what we get from the historical narrative. But it should also be stated that there's also a lot of places where the Psalms are reinforcing what we have in the historical narrative. So a good example here is the Exodus from Egypt, which is not supported by archaeology or not supported by any other outside history. But is mentioned all throughout the Psalms. So it's an indication that, maybe not be an indication that it's true, but it's an indication that this was widely believed by a number of different writers in ancient Israel.